Now we know that the Web API is a framework for building web services on top of HTTP. And Web API is going to allow us to easily consume XML or JSON. We're also going to see it's easy to produce XML or JSON. And one thing you're going to notice about it is that it has very similar features and concepts to ASP.NET MVC. There's controllers, there's models, there's action filters, but the MVC you are used to is really optimized for producing HTML by rendering a view. The Web API is optimized for working with every other content type, JSON, XML, anything custom that you want to plug in. It's also very extensible like MVC. You also get started a little bit differently with Web API, because whereas MVC is optimized for building web apps that run on a web server like IAS or IAS Express, Web API is designed to run anywhere, so you can start a new MVC project and make it a Web API project. That's one of the templates that you can select when you do File New Project. Or you can just start an MVC4 web application, a regular one, and Web API can be a part of it. Or another option is to start and have any kind of project, even a console mode program, and host a Web API inside. The easiest way to do this is to use NuGet to install Microsoft.ASP.NET.WebAPI.SelfHost package. That will give you all the assemblies and framework support that you need. We're going to start off by building an ASP.NET MVC4 web application, just a regular web application like we have been working with, and see what we can do with the Web API inside of a web app. Here we are inside of Visual Studio, and I'm going to start a new ASP.NET MVC4 web application. The name of this project is going to be Videos. And let me go ahead and click OK, and what you'll see is that Web API is one of the project templates available in Visual Studio. If I click that, I get an ASP.NET MVC project with a Web API controller already installed. But let's go ahead and build just a regular ASP.NET MVC Internet application and add an API controller to this project once it gets spun up, because you can add Web API into anything. Now the new project is finally put together, and let me just hit Control F5 to make sure everything is running properly before we start making changes, and it looks like the home page appears properly. So now I'm ready to work with the Web API, and I can do that already because when you create a new MVC4 project, an internet application, it will provide you everything that you need to work with the Web API. Most notably, it will include the system.web.http assembly. And that is actually done by installing the Web API as a NuGet package. In fact, if I look at the list of installed packages in this project, it includes everything from jQuery to the Entity Framework to the Web API, which is over here on page 2. And this is actually a nice feature because currently I'm working with the Web API, the release candidate version. At some point, there will be an update to this package, and when there is, all I need to do is come into my NuGet packages, look at the updates that are available, click Update, and I'll be working with the latest version of the Web API. That's great, but I have everything in this project that I need to work with the Web API already, and what I'd like to do is build a little web service using the Web API that will allow someone to make calls to manage a list of videos, and that means responding to HTTP requests. And just like everything else in ASP.NET MVC, if you want to respond to an HTTP request, you need to write a controller. But in this case, my controller is going to be slightly different. I'll right-click on the controllers folder, say Add Controller. I'm going to call it a video controller, and the template I'm going to select is API controller. So not a regular MVC controller that can render views, but an API controller with empty read-write actions. And even though I'm adding this to the controllers folder, there's no reason that I have to do that. I could put it anywhere inside of this project. A lot of people like adding API controllers to an API folder, but you could also have them in the same folder as the other controllers or in a different project that's referenced by this web project. They can live anywhere. So with the controller name specified, the template specified, let me click Add. And one of the reasons this is called an API controller is because it's part of the Web API and it derives from a base class known as API controller. So this is the base class for all of the Web API controllers that need to respond to HTTP messages. API controller is going to be somewhat familiar to you if you've worked with MVC controllers in the past, because it still has a controller context property, it still has a model state property. You can get to the requests you can get to the current user property. And you might think that if I did a build at this point, that I'd be able to reach this controller with a browser just by going to localhost/video/git, because that's the way the rest of MVC works. If I have a home controller with an index action, then I go to /home/index and it appears. But API controllers, the routing rules are slightly different, and that's what we're going to look at next. Even though I went to /video/git, I don't appear to be getting into this method. Instead, I'm getting a 404 error. So let's talk about routing with Web API.